Welcome to Conversations for Our Time, podcast number 11 with the Quiet Sun team, George and John. It certainly has been a while since we have made a podcast together, and we apologise for that, but we haven't been wasting any time as such. We have continued on our journey to learn more about regenerative permaculture practices, and not just permaculture, but in all aspects of life, because we know that the earth is a school and we come here to learn who we are, to learn how to live naturally as much as we can, and to be basically the caretakers for the lovely earth that we live on, who gives us so much. Even though there is still a lot of pain and suffering going on in the world and a lot of deception, but we still have to find the beauty out of the chaos. And we can do that through connecting ourselves with permaculture and reconnecting ourselves with nature and start living our lives the way we're supposed to, like our ancestors did. So, in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing what we have learned since our last podcast, the mistakes that we've made, and the solutions for a steady security of food production, because we can create that ourselves. And we have the power to generate a localized food system to take care of our communities and live in much, much more harmony with nature, working with her. And there is nothing better than that, and eating healthy food, moving away from industrial agriculture, which we know what they do to the soil and the food and the environment. But having fresh, seasonal, and local food is key to our health, the real food of the gods, especially fruit. And you can have homegrown food all year round. You just got to get through the hungry gap between usually March and May, but that's where storing food comes in, and we've done that on previous podcasts. So just how they used to do it in the good old days, but we are bringing these practices back, and even late cropping apples varieties can be picked and stored for several months. But we can do all these things. It's truly magnificent. Even the word magnificence is truly magnificent, to magnify our sense and to reconnect with nature, to live a full and abundant life through mind, body, and spirit, like the triune gods that we are, that we all are. We need to just realize our own power and take it back, to know that we had the power all along. So I'm just going to say for now that there will probably be, this will probably be a long podcast, and I think we're going to break this up into several parts because we don't want to make it too overwhelming for anyone. I think that can happen when beginners start to grow food. So what we'll do is we'll start from the basics, and then we'll slowly get into more detail into these permaculture practices. And you don't have to take away everything that we discuss. Even if you take away a couple of ideas and practice them, if that's enough for you, then that's great. But then there's, as I say, there's no need to overwhelm yourselves of any of it. Take your time in learning. Any questions, we are here to help. Contact details will be left and relevant links as always. I think this podcast will be for people for all levels, and some parts will be basic, some parts will be intermediate, and some parts will no doubt be very complex. But we all go at our own pace and we learn at our own pace. So, yes, John, how have you been doing, and what have you been doing since our last podcast?
Hi George. So yeah, I'm good. I'm good. It's been probably about a year, isn't it, since we did the last one?
I
Um,
think so. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, Things have been progressing, I mean, it's just this like the ebb and flow of life, isn't it? Um,
Yes.
Sometimes you're sky high, sometimes you're underground, and
Yes.
you've just got to kind of flow like water. So lots happening here. I'm currently in between my home in Essex and my partner's home in London. I've just done a transformation on my allotment. So that's a permaculture plot. So I've got a food forest in the middle, and I'm growing your kind of conventional garden crops, kitchen crops, and I'm growing quinoa and buckwheat and playing around with like guilds and companion planting, and I built a wildlife area. So that was really fun for doing that for like 4 or 5 months. I was lucky enough to have a little bit of money, so I didn't have to work during that. And I've just completed my advanced permaculture design course. And I've now started a regenerative soil course. These are with Matt Powers, my teacher. And this course is, the regenerative soil course is probably, 10 times as complex as the permaculture course.
Yes.
So lots of depth and breadth, and the world of soil is like a micro universe.
Yes,
And
definitely.
I say on my website, this microcosm to the macrocosm is quite it's awe-inspiring, because this as well, George, from our atom to the star, our sun, there are patterns and cycles which are inherent in all life.
Yes.
And I think if you're gonna be successful, and I don't mean like status or material wealth, but I mean successful as in you're growing organically yourself, as in you're evolving as a being, understanding cycles and patterns, whether it's psychology or cosmology or the soil, or society. Knowing the cycles and patterns is probably the most fundamental thing you can know, because then you can see the deception, you can see the lies, you can see the truth, you can understand why people do what they do, and you can make these analogies, like the pathogens that exist in the soil are nature trying to tell us that the soil life is out of balance. And it's the same as when pathogens exist in society, and I'm using the word pathogen to illustrate certain groups of people or ways of thinking, it's because society is out of balance. Buddhism talks about this, many ancient civilizations have talked about this, and civilizations have risen and fallen due to this imbalance. And the earth is just, this word great reset, it's been used quite a lot recently. The earth is the only thing that will reset, or the sun, the cosmos is this resetting, So the reason I'm mentioning this is because I think it's really important to have this as a framework to understand life and to understand our own behavior as well. Personally speaking, I can have these particular habits or behaviors that can be quite destructive, right? When my ego, we talked about this other day, George, didn't we?
Yes.
My ego can get flared up, right? I was listening to Kay Patcher the other day, the astrologer, and he's been part of this men's group, this shadow work, okay? And one of the sayings there is, if you spot it, you've got it. right? So what you can spot in other people, you've got in you somewhere, and
Yeah, yes.
that's why
Mm.
it bothers you.
Yes, and these are the triggers, and these are the triggers that we need to look out for, because it's all evolving, it's all healing mentally,
Yeah.
emotionally,
Mm,
physically, and spiritually is the key thing that is sadly been missed in society slightly.
exactly.
The spirituality, and I would agree with a lot of what you've said there, and I would, yeah, you like to bring Buddhism into permaculture practices. I like to bring the natural law into it, which
Yeah.
is saying the same thing
It's the
essentially.
same thing, isn't it? It's just
Yeah.
a different lens, you know.
Yes. Exactly.
And it's the same as permaculture is a lens. It isn't the only answer.
Mm.
Biodynamic farming is another alternative, right?
Yes.
These, and if we limit ourselves just to practicing one thing, we end up becoming like a horse with blinkers on,
Yes.
and we
Yes.
can't see the other. And I've done that, so through my spiritual practice, I'm expanding my understanding, taking away my limitations, recognizing my ego. And I think this actually, when you grow food, you're going to hit a lot of mistakes. You're going to have a lot of failures. Even people that have been doing it for decades still have failures. And the point,
Absolutely. Mm.
exactly, and not to become attached to that, but the best teacher is nature. And if you actually just stop and listen and observe, and, you know, tests are really important, like using a microscope and other mineral tests to understand where you're at. But if you think about the people that grow on the planet that don't ever have tests, they, you know, they listen to nature. They take their ego out of it and they listen to nature. And this connection to nature, or this disconnection to nature, is one of the reasons why humanity is so out of balance. Because if we were really connected to nature, we wouldn't be allowing all these atrocities happening. We wouldn't be poisoning the soil. We wouldn't be poisoning the water. We wouldn't be killing off, thousands of species a week. You know what I mean? So it's all these things are um, observable if you step back and you just look at nature, and then you can see what's real and what's not. Um, so yeah, so it's that's really, the last year I've been learning a lot about this, and after all my hard work, I'm starting to have some really good breakthroughs, like both kind of you know within my career, but also within myself as well. um yeah, so it's a great ride, George, and it's really good to have a group of people, yourself included, um, who are on a very similar path, who are all trying to evolve as human beings, and trying to connect spiritually and emotionally and physically, like you said. And nature is an amazing, because it's not gonna, it's never gonna let you down, is it? Nature's always going to provide for us in some way. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she's so abundant to us, and as a society, unfortunately, people seems it's getting better, but they're not as grateful as they probably should be. But this is the imbalance that we have, and when we reconnect with nature, bringing that spirituality back, this is when we are one with nature, and that's the key thing. And this is what we really want to bring into our podcast is spirituality. It's we want to bring human consciousness into it, because it's a massive part, as above, so below.
yeah,
And with what you're learning, cutting edge permaculture practices, and learning off these great teachers. And we need to spread that about, because it's so empowering. We have given our power away for far too long. And when we do these practices, we can see it for ourselves. That
Mm.
that works, that works, that doesn't work. I made a mistake there, and you know it's all right because nature is our teacher, and she will show us if we are willing to look at the signs. She is communicating with us in another language, and we want to bring that into these podcasts because it is so empowering, and the things that we'll talk about. So what we'll do is we'll start off with the basics and recommendations with all of this because I think it's a great place to start. So if you are a total beginner in growing food, or this information might even help the well-seasoned grower, but we all learn every single day in different ways. And the first thing I will suggest is to buy a basic allotment month by month book. And this is like the very basic book. The reason why I suggest this is because if you are new to growing food and you go straight to someone like John Kempf or the natural Korean farming, it's just going to be too overwhelming for people. Okay, I've got a fair amount of knowledge myself with those researchers, myself, but John has dealt much deeper than I have. But there are things in, the more complex study of permaculture practices that some people might not fully understand just yet. And for the real basic information of growing food, it's best to buy a book like that by Alan Buckingham. I think even if you read that book, John, I'm sure you'll learn a one or two things as well, because it's always good to go back to basics as well. Now, I don't agree with everything that I read in a book or in that book particularly, but later on the line, the idea is for you to start changing things and practicing different things yourself to see what works and what doesn't work, certain practices. But a book like that will give people a good basis and foundation of how to grow food, where to start. But from that book, you'll find things like what to sow, when to transplant, when to harvest, spring crops, summer crops, autumn crops, winter crops. Although that may, have to be adjusted with these times that we're living in, but still, it gives you an idea, and it's good to have that background knowledge and that background foundation for you to build upon. It will tell you what plants to watch out for with regards to pests, but all that depends on the health of the soil, healthy plants, and pests only go for weak plants. And this is the thing that we need to scream and shout about a little bit, because that's telling you that something needs to be fixed in the soil. But it will tell you the common diseases on plants that you need to look out for like botrytis, which is like grey mold that you can get on strawberry flowers, or you got powdery mildew on zucchinis. Again, all depends on the soil food web, but these are just signs that nature is giving you to say something isn't right within the soil. If we understand her language, because she's, as I say, she's always communicating with us. I'm sure you'll agree, John.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, George. Yeah, going back to basics is really important. Funny enough, my dad actually bought me a book, an allotment book, the other day. Like, he bought it from a charity shop, but it was a really nice gift. And at first I thought, it's just a basic book about growing, but there's always something you can learn. And if you
Yes.
think a book is too simple for you, you're probably not wise enough. So it's really important to go to basics. And in regards to pest and disease, you're exactly right, George. Pests are the cleanup crew. I don't like to call them pests anymore. I like to call them cleanup crew, because all
Yes.
they're
Yeah.
doing is, when a plant is distressed, so a plant becomes distressed for many reasons: too much sun, not enough sun, too much water, not enough water, not good enough drainage, not enough nutrients, not the right biology, etc., etc. But the pests come in, that when a plant is in distress, it will send signals off, chemical signals. The pests know which plants to go for. And you can see this because you can grow a number of plants together and some will
Yes,
be eaten, some won't be eaten. Why is that? It's because one of them's weak. Now, it might be because of those reasons I listed before, but it also could be that that particular seed hasn't got strong enough genetics. So when you get
yes,
a bunch of seeds, when a plant produces seeds, some of them will be stronger than others, right?
yes,
Just like when an animal has a litter, you'll have a runt of a litter. This is just how nature works.
absolutely.
Um, so, there are always ways you can fix these problems. As far as seeds, I mean, we can get into this when we talk about seeds further on in the podcast. But yeah, so knowing the basics is really important, knowing what to look out for, like powdery mildew. Powdery mildew actually attacks plants. Powdery mildew is mildew, but it's a type of fungal pathogen, right? And it actually attacks plants because the plants have a weak cell structure. So if a plant is lacking in calcium, boron, or sulfur, it will have a weak cell wall. That means pathogens can get in. So that would be one reason for powdery mildew. So that, we could go into 5 podcasts just talking about this particular subject, but and John Kemp does a lot of work on this. He's got a thing called the plant health pyramid, and that talks about plant health and how
Yes,
when you start to give the plant what it needs, both the nutrients and the biology, it becomes completely robust, so pests and disease can't attack it.
yes.
Yeah,
I think, I
that's
think, I think
fascinating
it's
stuff.
yes. I mean, I think it's just amazing to know when you mention that the pests are like the cleanup agents, because it's what happens to our bodies when we're sick, and
Mm,
it's the same thing with the terrain, the terrain model. The same thing happens. It's as above, so below, and this is key. Nature is talking to us and
yeah.
communicating with us, and it is just the same thing. And when you look at it that way, it starts to make like so much more sense.
Mm,
And as you say that, you mentioned John Kemp as well. There, you know, the beautiful thing about learning all these practices and permaculture, it doesn't matter what area you go. There's a whole. If you want to stick with one particular thing, like what we were just discussing with pests, there's a whole universe involved in there. Or you can go into another subject or another subject. There's always something to learn. It's like it's like a universe within a universe within a universe. There's never an ending to the subject. That's the beauty of this. You can pick any area in permaculture, and you can just continue to learn.
yeah, exactly, George. And my question. Well, you know what I thought. Most recently, I'm really trying to cultivate curiosity. So
Yes,
rather than judging something and thinking I know what's going on, I'm starting to ask myself more questions. So rather than a statement, I'm starting to ask more questions. And this isn't just something you apply to growing food. This is like a life lesson, right?
yes,
Someone pisses you off and you're like, that person, right? You make a judgment. I do it all the time, right? um, but actually, if you wonder, like, why is that person being that way? Because what it makes you do is it makes you start to delve more into um, why the world works the way the world works. And it's the same with nature. Is, oh, that slug is eating my lettuce. right?
Yes.
And you're blaming the slug, right?
Yes.
The slug's just doing, it's just eating, it's just doing its job. If you ask why is that slug eating my lettuce, it opens up a whole new story.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
actually, if you want to grow food, if you're passionate, not everyone wants to, but if you're passionate about it, the curiosity will make you become a much better grower, and it will make you become a better version of yourself. You know, so this is why nature's a great teacher, because it doesn't just teach you about growing food; it teaches you about yourself. This is why I named my company Sow and Grow, because it's not just about growing food; it's about you growing with your food. You know, this is
Yeah.
of many famous philosophers, Voltaire being one of them. That their philosophies came from nature, right? The Buddha's own philosophies came from observing nature. This is where I believe all the beliefs and, you know, these great kind of thinkers, they observe nature. All inventions come from observing nature, right?
I would, yeah, I would absolutely agree. Yeah, absolutely, because everywhere you look, there is a lesson in every moment, and it is a gift, you know. And it's sad that people are not asking and questioning why, because there's a whole thing to learn in that
Mm,
moment of whatever that situation is. The key, we've forgotten as a society to ask why. They're too
mm.
compliant, but we are breaking that cycle, and we are taking back our power, and it's about learning, learning of all aspects within us
Yeah.
and human consciousness. And that is the lesson, the lessons are all there. So yeah, I would agree with everything you've said there. And what we'll do is just slightly move on to what it also says in the book for the allotment month by month is it talks about how to collect and store water. One way is obviously with a water butt, and anyone can just look on YouTube to see how to install one. They're very simple, and we can really think about what kind of watering system that you can have. A self-watering garden system, perhaps passive water harvesting to improve the drought and flood resilience. Letting gravity do the work, no mechanics, no pumping, just capture, gravel for trenching or French drainage. You've got swale systems, so quite a lot of options there, John.
Yeah, loads of options. I mean, if you know nothing about capturing water, then start off with a water butt. You can get big 1,000 litre. They're not water butts. They're called IBCs, individual
Yes,
bulk
yes.
containers. They work really well. You can get them online for about £50 used, and it's really, luckily in the UK we don't get many drought periods. Sometimes we do get them. But what happens when you get a lot of rain, right? And there's too much rain for the water butts. Yeah. What do? Well, before water butts were invented, the water would just stay on the land and the water table would rise. Yeah. So there's a thing called a water table, and that's how deep the water is underneath the ground.
Yes,
Okay?
yes.
People call it groundwater. That leads into aquifers, but it's the land stores water itself. So you mentioned about swales. I don't really know anything about French drainage, but um, I built some swales onto my allotment, um, and swales have been around for millennia in some way or another. They're known as
Yeah,
earthworks, and what you can do is they're ditches on contour, so they're going to be parallel with the or perpendicular with the slope of the land.
yes.
Okay, So as the rain falls down, you form these ditches or whatever you want to call them. And rather than the water bouncing off the ground, it will sit in this ditch. Because it's in a ditch, it will allow the water to slowly infiltrate into the land. Okay. So you can do this on huge scales, like you can make them hundreds of meters long, or you can do really small ones. And the great thing is a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll build these, or they'll create them near trees. Trees need, especially when they're young, tend to need a lot of water. So if you've planted out, say, a food forest, which is like a multi-layered perennial system, and you planted a bunch of shrubs and fruit bushes, at the beginning of their life, they're going to need a lot of water.
Yes.
If you can't store water, or if you can't store enough, when you do have the rains that come, these swale systems will help you to keep water on, that will like slowly filtrate into the ground. And they call it so slow spread soak. So you slow the water down, you spread it out, and you allow it to soak into the ground. Now, there are other things like you need, if you have like a lot of compaction, that water's just going to either sit on top or it will run off it.
Yes.
So there needs to be other things that are done to the land. But, the other thing about storing water is, if you've always got something growing in the land, wherever that is, the moisture will be held on that land for longer. So if you look at a farmer's field that grows wheat, most of them, they harvest the wheat, right, before winter time. Then it rains shitloads. Where does the water go? The water just floods off it. So they're losing all that water. But if they planted cover crops, right, the cover crops they'd be fixing nitrogen, they'd be doing a little bit of tillage, so they'd be breaking up the soil, but also they'd be holding on to the moisture. So next season, when the farmer comes to plant their crops, they don't need to water as much.
Yes.
So we just need to go back to basics. And I'm talking about, farmers don't need to be spending all this money. There's really basic things that they can do, and that applies to the gardener as well. So, it's just amazing, really.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely a great, exactly. It's a great system to have if you've got, you can do all these things, if you've got your own land, it's really important to get it out there, because there are people doing these things anyway. But, we always want to learn how to do it as well, and learn how the process is, because we're mentally preparing.
Yeah.
And we're preparing for our own land, our own future, and the universe will bring it when we're ready.
Exactly. And this is the thing, whenever you start growing, or even if you're going to make mistakes, things aren't going to go as quickly as you want them to. Quite often, it teaches you to be patient. It teaches you to respect the land more. If we just want to spray chemicals on it and expect that land is going to continue to produce food for us, we're kidding ourselves.
Exactly.
And it really is the ego that makes us think that.
Yeah,
so
I do agree with you. Yeah, absolutely.
Whether you own hundreds of acres or you own a little back garden, you can do something to store more water. You can do something to improve the land. You can do something to improve your health. We don't have to do things the conventional way. We can go back to how it used to be.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Absolutely. And yeah, and just and this is just to give people ideas, and just going back to the drainage system that I was talking about. I've not done it myself, but the French drainage is basically a drain consisting of an underground passage made by filling a trench with loose stones and covering it with earth. That's how the system actually works.
Okay.
Sometimes called rubble drain.
So
But
that might be similar to a swale then.
yeah, yeah, there are people doing it that way. You can just look on YouTube and see what people are doing. But yeah, absolutely similar. And again, it's just an amazing process when you actually learn these things. And this is what we want to just bounce ideas, basically.
Mm.
So yeah, that's just water systems. Also, it's some people might not also know the difference between annual plants, biennial plants, and perennials. I know it sounds silly because I didn't know when I first started growing food, but I mean it's all right because you learn, and that's why the basic book of an allotment book will give you this background knowledge and can really help. And these small things can help to make a connection with your plants, even small things like that. It's about making a connection in any way you can with what you're doing. Why are you growing this plant? What fruit, veg, or herb are you wanting? What are you wanting in
Mm.
return? What is the cycle of this particular plant or tree, etc. It's about knowing what plant or tree does what, John.
Exactly. And they all perform different functions. And whether you're growing annuals, perennials, biennials, the most important thing you can ever do is grow lots of different plants. Biodiversity is key. Monocropping is had its day.
Yes, agree.
Without biodiversity, this is where disease and pests are more likely to attack. Um, so you plant your carrots with your onions and sage, right? There
Yes,
you've got a biennial, you've got a perennial, you've got an annual. They all worked well together, right? That's also companion planting. Um, and the sage will act as a deterrent to a degree because of its strong smell, so
strong
it
smells.
will
Yeah,
confuse the insects. That's just a little snippet, but the point is when you go into nature, you don't see all the same plant. You don't see it. You see a diversity of trees or a diversity of plants. That's
yeah,
how nature works because nature is very, very clever and wise, and it doesn't make any mistakes. It's designed in a way, whoever designed it, it's designed in a perfect way that we think might be imperfect, but it's because we don't understand the complexity of it. So,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
nature knows the best. She's working with harmony. She is always working to balance things out, and that's why we love nature because she knows best. And when man gets involved, trying to, thinking that they can do better than nature, and that's when we start doing damage. We must follow nature, and she will always balance things out. Um, what I was also thinking, John, is possibly to end the podcast right here and now, because what we're going to do is going to do this in several parts. So this will be part one. So thanks for joining us all, and we really hope that this information is helpful. We're going to go into it all a little bit more deeper on the next podcast. So stay tuned for that, and we'll catch up with you then. Thanks.